On day one, the southern border slams shut to illegal immigration. So all the illegal aliens all over the world who have been taking a free ride at America's expense for 4 years, guess what? You show up, you're not getting in, you're not getting through, you're not getting released, you're not going to any city anywhere in America. The only thing you're getting, courtesy of the U.S. taxpayer, is a flight back home.
Big promises from the incoming U.S. president.
On day one, I will launch the largest deportation program in American history.
He's talking about millions of people, but how is that going to work, and how should Canada prepare? To untangle this, Paul Hunter is in Washington. Catherine Cullen is in Ottawa. So, Paul, day one, Donald Trump wants to launch this mass deportation program. Where does he start?
As soon as he walks into the White House on Inauguration Day, Adrian, right off the bat, he's made clear his immediate priority will be to go after migrants with criminal records and any migrant known to be or suspected to be in a gang. As he's put it, they will be hunted down and arrested. But broadly speaking, Trump's goal is to deport every undocumented migrant in the country. And there are 11 million of them. That's more than everyone in Alberta and British Columbia combined. A massive undertaking. That said, the guessing is that a realistic number is 1 million deportations per year. So how to do that? Well, there'd be mass raids, almost certainly involving municipal, state, and federal enforcement officers, likely moving in on workplaces, schools, hospitals, churches in all 50 states, and checkpoints, show me your papers kind of thing. Once found and arrested, the throngs of migrants would need someplace to be held for processing. This is where the camps come in. The state of Texas has already offered up land for a giant detention camp, roughly the size of 700 football fields. Then comes that processing. Anyone who's lived in the U.S. for at least 2 years, regardless of legal status, is entitled to a deportation hearing, a day in court, as it were, for all who qualify. When that happens, and if then ordered deported, out they go. At least that's the plan. Look, Trump wants to go big on this, and he wants to go as quickly as possible. Want to know if he's serious, Adrian? Give a listen to Stephen Miller, arguably the most influential advisor to Trump on this issue. Here he is.
As the campaign unfolds, Trump has made his intentions abundantly clear. Even some corners of the media are beginning to acknowledge that. Once he's in office, he will dedicate significant energy to fulfill his promise on addressing the issue of illegal mass immigration in America. Now, let's hear from the Deputy Chief of Policy in Trump's administration. This is important to you because you'll be able to understand moving forward what's going to happen to mass immigration with the current Trump administration. Let's listen in.
Here he is.
On day one, the southern border slams shut to illegal immigration. So all the illegal aliens all over the world who have been taking a free ride at America's expense for 4 years, guess what? You show up, you're not getting in, you're not getting through, you're not getting released, you're not going to any city anywhere in America. The only thing you're getting, courtesy of the U.S. taxpayer, is a flight back home.
Okay, tough talk. I mean, Catherine, if the Americans launch this mass deportation, and presumably it's a matter of when they launch it, is the expectation simply that there will just be a surge of people heading into Canada?
There are certainly warnings to that effect, Adrian. You talk about former federal immigration minister, former premier of Alberta, Jason Kenney, has given that warning. Kelly Craft, who is Donald Trump's former ambassador to Canada, saying prepare. This country needs to be prepared for a major influx. And if that does happen, it's a challenge on a couple of fronts. Because of the Safe Third Country Agreement with the United States, anybody who wants to get into Canada and stay, they can't just come to an official border crossing. They would have to sneak across the border and stay in Canada undetected for 14 days. Now, they could, after those 14 days, then claim asylum. That is a challenge for Canada because there's a massive backlog of refugee claims. We're talking about 250,000. It would take years to process the claims that are already in the pipe. So if you add a lot of numbers to that, obviously a problem. But even if people continue to live underground, off the radar, the federal government has just cut back its own immigration targets, acknowledging them. When it comes to housing, when it comes to social services, there is a strain across the country, essentially that we are to some extent at capacity when it comes to taking on a greater number of new people. So add a big unexpected surge, that's a challenge on that front.
Thinking about what you just said about the rules, right, about the 14 days, I am guessing, though, that the rules as they exist now could very well change, right? We're not talking about forever rules depending on the situation. And, on that note, when we're talking about numbers, if we look at what happened in Canada between 2016 and Trump's first year, when there was just a threat of mass deportations, look what happened to asylum seekers in Canada that year alone. Look at that jump. That is just on the threat of deportation. So clearly the operating presumption in Ottawa is that people will come and that it will be more than a threat, that the deportations will happen. Here's what NDP leader Jagmeet Singh told reporters yesterday about border security in general and what he thinks needs to happen.
We need to immediately hire 1,100 CBSA officers just to get back to the level where we can actually do the minimum required and then look at hiring more officers to do a better job of protecting Canadians. This is not just about making sure we prevent the trade tariffs that could hurt us directly, but it's also in our interest to do this.
So, Catherine, I mean, that's what the NDP wants to happen. What are your sources telling you that the Canadian government is actually going to do?
Yeah, it's interesting, Adrian, the extent to which the Canadian government is being fairly tight-lipped about this. They say they don't want to engage in hypotheticals. At the same time, they're trying to offer assurances to Canadians that they have thought about these issues. And I have to tell you, this isn't just a conversation that's happening politically. The CBC radio show and political podcast that I host, The House, just last week, we were at one of Canada's 3 immigration holding centers, and we were talking to senior officials within the Canada Border Services Agency. And we were told this question of taking on more people, be it in the holding centers, engaging in more deportations, these are things they have considered, things that they are prepared for. Of course, the government doesn't want to get things to that level, right? They want to stop people at the border and turn them around. And this is where, interestingly, Donald Trump's own interests dovetail with the Canadian government. He has been talking about drugs and human smuggling, drugs headed into the United States from Canada. And that has prompted the Canadian government to talk about how it wants to deal with the border, be it through drones, getting more helicopters, more resources on the border. All of those things would, of course, help as well if there was a surge coming in the other direction. It's really interesting, though, Adrian, to contrast this moment to 2017, a famous or infamous, depending on how you look at it, tweet from Justin Trudeau, where he said when Trump was enacting his ban of people from several majority Muslim countries, to those fleeing persecution, terror, and war, Canada will welcome you regardless of your faith. The political climate is very different now. The politics of immigration in Canada have changed. This Trump administration appears that it is going to be a very different one. Right now, the Canadian government is preparing to spend about $250,000 on ads. This is a campaign they've been doing in recent years for people who are looking up how to claim asylum in Canada, warning them there are rules. It's a complex process. You have to follow the rules if you want to come here.
Canada has begun cooperating with the program as well, marking a shift from the stance that they took during much of the Biden administration and parts of the Trump administration. Now, they recognize the severity of the problem of mass immigration and are committed to being part of the solution when insisting the mass deportations of illegal immigrants residing in their country. That was CBC News. Now let's take a look at MSNBC and see what they have to say about the issue as well. Listen in.
This morning, we're learning new details about how President-elect Trump's mass deportation plans could play out when he returns to the White House. NBC News is exclusive reporting that the incoming administration is preparing a list of countries where it may deport migrants if the countries where those migrants are from refuse to accept them. This according to 3 sources familiar with the matter. Joining us now, her exclusive reporting, NBC's Julia Ainsley, also from El Paso, Texas, Lauren Villagran, national reporter for USA Today. So, Julia, what more did you learn? I mean, what countries are on this list and why?
It's a surprising list, Jose. We're talking about Turks and Caicos, the Bahamas, Panama and Grenada. Now, I understand they may explore more of those. They definitely want Mexico to be on that list. They want to be able to deport people from inside the United States back to Mexico, which is one of the reasons why Trump has threatened those tariffs recently. But those are small countries that the Trump transition team believes that they can deport migrants to because they think that they have the political and economic and diplomatic pressure to force them to do so. But a lot of those countries are not people who are having a lot of their own nationals come to the United States. So if you're talking about people, say from Venezuela, a country that won't take their nationals back, they would then be accepting Venezuelans who don't know anything about the culture, may not even speak the language in those countries, Jose.
This stance is clearly absurd. Claiming that Venezuelans deported to Mexico won't understand the culture or be able to speak the language is frankly ridiculous. Even giving the benefit of the doubt, let's say Venezuelans or other Latinos were deported to Jamaica, for example, that's a risk they should have considered when migrating to America illegally. Anytime you take some type of risky action in life, you have to weigh both the potential benefit and the possible negative consequence of doing so. While the reward might seem appealing, the risks, like deportation, are part of the equation. Unfortunately, it seems that these realities weren't fully considered in the decision of a lot of illegal immigrants. It is said that it doesn't matter what you think or believe, the truth is the only thing that what eventually prevails.
Yeah, it's so interesting because they're relatively of all of them, these are relatively small countries, right? I mean, what about Grenada, the Bahamas, Turks and Caicos, Panama, where of course Panama has seen a huge impact on their country because it is very close to where the Darien jungle and all of that area is. But Lauren, you also have new reporting about how the humanitarian crisis in Mexico is bringing out strong reactions from Mexicans.
Yes, Jose. I was traveling in Mexico recently. Of course, I'm here at the El Paso Ciudad Juarez border, where, we have seen a sharp drop in migration over to the US side, but more migrants waiting in Mexico. And it's really started to shift public opinion in Mexico against migrants, which is a fairly new development.
Yeah, and so what is it that they're saying?
Yeah, so there are two new surveys out. One from last year shows that 7 in 10 Mexicans believe that migration through Mexico is excessive. You got another survey from the United Nations Refugee Agency showing increasingly negative views against migrants among Mexicans, and also a lot of misunderstanding of why people are migrating. The vast majority of respondents to the UN survey, for example, believe that migrants, are moving through their country for economic reasons to head for jobs in the United States, when more than half of migrants respond to the United Nations' own surveys of migrants, saying that, they're fleeing violence and insecurity. As you know, the reasons that people flee their countries are as varied as the people themselves.
Yeah, and Julia, meanwhile.
The survey clearly shows that the majority of people believe migrants coming to America for economic opportunities. Historically, economic reasons have always been the number one reason and factor driving immigrants to the United States, which is known for the land of freedom and opportunity. And that reputation continues essentially to attract people from around the world. She mentions that according to the survey, just over half of immigrants said that they were leaving their countries for refuge and safety. That's not surprising given the fact that the claim to get refuge and security is the only viable path when traveling illegally to another country. But let's be real. If those same migrants were asked whether they were also coming to America for economic opportunities, I'm 100% sure that a higher percentage than that would say yes. Even she acknowledges that most Mexican communities view the mass migration problem of their own citizens to the United States as a problem. That's worth thinking about. This is a clear example of how data can be interpreted differently. While she may be acting in good faith and adding one or more layer of context, such as migrants directly about their economic motivations, could reveal that the narrative she's presenting doesn't fully align with what's reality. Nearly 100% of migrants would likely admit that they were also seeking economic opportunities, which is consistent with what America's enduring appeal is to the country. Listen, if you like this video, make sure you subscribe. I'm glad you sticked around to the end. I'm Mr. Rembrandt, and this is Mr. Rembrandt. See you on the next video.